In the early 90s, fighting games were the biggest thing around. Pretty much anyone who was playing video games at the time has at least one memory of dropping a quarter into an arcade machine at some pizza place or hole in the wall and promptly getting their ass handed to them as they panicked to try and figure out at least one special move while their opponent beat the ever-loving crap out of them. It was a badge of honor the day you pulled off your first Shoryuken, and once you got to the point that you could actually start beating end bosses or even other players, it was a big deal. There was few feelings like having a group of people watch as you actually pulled off a cool combo, beating your opponent and making him waste his hard-earned quarters hopelessly trying to beat you. Or, in my case, wasting my hard-earned quarters trying in vain to beat somebody who couldn't even beat Blanca. One game that perfectly captured the feeling of, hey, check out this cool thing I just did, better than any other was Mortal Kombat. It's one thing to beat someone with a flaming Shoryuken. When you start tearing people's spines out, it's a whole different ballgame. While in retrospect, Street Fighter II may have been the better game, 1992's Mortal Kombat made people take notice in a way that few other fighting games did. Arcade games in the 90s were far more advanced than their home console counterparts, so home ports of video games tended to have major limitations on them. This usually means having to compromise in the audio or visual department, like the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis versions of Mortal Kombat. There is, however, one home port of the game that didn't have to compromise in that many ways, but it's one that most people don't remember. The DOS port of Mortal Kombat 1 has several advantages over its console counterparts. First, and most obvious, the game's graphics are far better, and the audio is a much better match to the original. In addition, it has all the blood and gore that was missing from the Super Nintendo version, without the need for any codes to put it back in like the Genesis version. Honestly, as far as contemporary ports of the game go, the DOS version is by far the best. It's not without its flaws, however. The Test Your Might minigame is especially difficult on a keyboard, and getting a controller to work with the game, especially using DOSBox, is tricky. Also, I find the polite golf clap at the end of a round to be a bit hilarious. You might think using a keyboard to play Mortal Kombat would be difficult, but in all honesty, the two-input command system used for Mortal Kombat special moves actually is a pretty natural fit for the keyboard, making doing special moves like Sub-Zero's Ice Ball or Scorpion's Harpoon actually pretty easy to pull off. The port of Mortal Kombat 2 for DOS is a similar story. Featuring audio and visuals better than the console versions but still below the arcade ports, Mortal Kombat 2 DOS is a vastly improved sequel. Featuring more characters, better fatalities, and improved gameplay, Mortal Kombat 2 is still many players' favorite in the series. Mortal Kombat 2 sees the introduction of Shao Kahn, the Emperor of Outworld and overall main antagonist of the series. More importantly, it introduces the Toasty Guy, an Easter egg of sound designer Dan Forden that would sometimes appear when you land particularly devastating uppercuts. While a single-stage fatality existed in Mortal Kombat 1, achieved by uppercutting an opponent on the pit stage during the finish him phase, they really came into their own in Mortal Kombat 2, with a variety of stage-based fatalities possible. Also, Kung Lao's fatality remains my favorite in the entire series. That's just awesome. The audio, especially the music from Mortal Kombat 2, does vary quite a lot from the arcade version, but as somebody who played a lot of PC games growing up, I honestly prefer this version of a lot of the songs. However, the announcer and character voices in this version of the game sound absolutely fantastic, and a lot of the sound effects actually sound better than the arcade versions to me.
Fatality.
Mortal Kombat 3 attempted to bring a few changes to the game's formula. For one, many fan-favorite characters didn't see a return in the original version. Even Scorpion. Friggin' Scorpion wasn't playable in the original version of 3. Instead, much of the game's focus was shifted from ninjas to robots like Sector and Cyrax. New additions to Mortal Kombat 3 also included the run button, which allowed a player to quickly traverse the screen, helping players deal with overly defensive opponents, and two new kinds of fatalities, friendships and animalities. Mortal Kombat 3 also featured multi-level stages that allowed players to fight in more than one arena, usually by uppercutting the hell out of somebody through the ceiling. The DOS port of Mortal Kombat 3 has a few quirks, however. The game only gives you a few seconds on the character select screen before continuing forward. In addition, there are occasionally visual glitches as well. When doing Kung Lao's fatality, the bloody parts of the victim's body turn from red to pink as soon as the fatality message pops up. Unlike the previous two Mortal Kombat games on DOS, Mortal Kombat 3 allows you to continue an infinite number of times, which is convenient if you're terrible at the game like I am. Are the DOS versions of Mortal Kombat worth picking up? If you like Mortal Kombat and don't mind a few quirks, absolutely, especially considering that all three games are available in a pack from GOG.com for about $6. While there are better versions out there now, like the arcade collection on PSN, PC, and Xbox Live Arcade, looking at the DOS versions of Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3 gives a pretty good idea of what players had available to them at the time the arcade games were actually new. If you've never played Mortal Kombat before, this is a cheap and solid way to experience it for the first time. If you've played the series to death, it's an interesting side note to the franchise that you might have missed if you'd only played the Super Nintendo, Genesis, and arcade versions. For more reviews on older games, please like and subscribe.
Fatality.